Okay, about 30 seconds, ladies and gentlemen, if I could get you to sit down and eyes to the front. Sit down, Gregor. 15 seconds, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll get the back half of the day underway. So I hope you enjoyed your lunch and the collegiality and the camaraderie of good table mates and reflecting on very healthy conversation this morning. Chris and Carl and John, I think, did a tremendous job trying to bring some clarity to a world of much ambiguity. And as we go through the balance of the program, I think the next phase of the speakers and panelists will help define and bring some meaning to the notion of corporate social responsibility. Now, I reflected this morning on the importance of Export Development Canada and Foreign Affairs Trade and Development Canada in terms of great tools for companies that are looking to expand their operations overseas. And we heard from our speakers this morning about the relationship between corporate Canada and governmental Canada in terms of defining a great CSR continuum. We have a great cabinet minister who's now going to share with us some thoughts on this subject matter and also bring greetings on behalf of the federal government. And to introduce our guest, I'd like to invite Gord Lambert. Gord's an executive advisor with Suncor on the innovation and sustainability file. He's been at this for a long, long time. In fact, he's probably one of the preeminent statesmen on the whole CSR sustainability file. He speaks with a great deal of authority and a great deal of experience, and he's a key part of the COSIA enterprise, representing Suncor, and he's been a key part of the building of COSIA. And we keep repeating that because it's an entity and an enterprise that will continue to deliver great value for our industry. So, ladies and gentlemen, Gord Lambert.
And I think that introduction was another way of saying, Gord, you're an old guy. And first of all, it's a great honor to be here with you today and to be part of this very important forum exploring new models for how we can create shared value. Having Minister Rempel and Professor Porter here with us today shows the importance of the topic to Canada, Alberta, and to our oil and gas industry. I'll be formally introducing Minister Rempel in a moment, but I first wanted to share some thoughts with you on the conference theme. The work we do as practitioners and as leaders in helping to create a strong economy, a healthy environment, and social well-being is critically important work. This is what we do, and we need to be bolder and better doing it. What we do and why we do it, I think, are fairly clear. But are we starting to lose the plot on how we do it? We're seeing a real tendency towards polarizing behaviors and across all segments of civil society. And it's not just on the oil sands and environment. I think if you look around, you see it on many difficult issues. And it's not just Neil Young either. The polarizing behavior leads to creation and reinforcement of silos where as individuals we begin to only work with people who feel the same way we do and to demonize those who we disagree with. At a time when we have daunting and complex economic, environment, and social challenges, it's critical that we convene multiple interests and diverse expertise to create better answers together. This is at the heart of how shared value gets created. Rather than focusing on our differences, let's look for our common interests that underlie the positions we take. Let's listen deeper, let's inspire one another, Let's harness diversity to create innovative approaches and solutions to tough problems, and let's achieve big, bold outcomes. And we need to avoid the dangerous mindset that you win by making someone else lose, where it's about assigning blame or not even wanting solutions if it means consorting with the enemy. This is a race to the bottom. We do have many examples that are multi-party and multi-stakeholder approaches and what they can accomplish. A great example of that, as mentioned, is currently in flight, is Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, where we've brought 13 companies with diverse cultures and histories together, and we're going to drive environmental performance improvement faster and better together than we could do independently. From a Suncor perspective, I would cite Aboriginal business development, where we've now exceeded $2 billion in business with First Nations owned and operated businesses, numbers of which we helped to conceive and create in collaboration between our supply chain and with First Nations leaders. It's very Canadian to harness diversity to achieve big outcomes. It's how the country works. My call to action is that each of us needs to model the behaviors required to build bridges among us, not tear them down. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the Honourable Michelle Rempel, Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre North and the Minister of State for Western Economic Diversification. For those of you who are political observers, you'll know Michelle as the minister who sits directly behind the Prime Minister in the House of Commons and is almost always on camera. Previously, Minister Rempel served as director of the University of Calgary's Institutional Programs Division and built a strong reputation for successfully promoting innovative academic and business research partnerships. She also worked in the Technology Commercialization Division of the University of Manitoba, where she assisted in administering commercialization strategies for a portfolio of over 200 emerging technologies. Minister Rempel has an extensive background in promoting innovative academic and business research partnerships, and in 2010 was named one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women by the Women's Executive Network. In 2011, she was elected to the House of Commons and was appointed Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment. In 2013, Michelle was appointed Minister of State for Western Economic Diversification and became the youngest minister in Prime Minister Harper's cabinet. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Michelle Rempel, Minister of State for Western Economic Diversification. Michelle.
Thank you all for having me here today on a topic that is, I think, very central and core to the question of Canada's long-term economic growth and sustainability. Before I get into it, I want to congratulate Bill Whitelaw and his group for having this conference. Congratulations. I think just bringing people together to talk about this is a positive first step, so congratulations for another successful event. I know many of you in this room. I know Gord. I actually worked with him on a project in my previous life, and I had a few of you text me prior to this to talk about some of the themes that came up this morning, including government's role in CSR. You know, it's interesting because I think if you were to look at the vision or mission statement of our current government, we've been very clear. Our role in terms of what we want to accomplish is to have Canada's long-term economic growth be A, sustained, and B, sustainable. So how do we achieve that? You know, economic policy, you're going to hear from one of the world's leaders, if not the world's leader in economic policy in a wide variety of area in a few minutes. But from a government perspective, you know, we have a few different ways that we can look at things. We can look at taxation policy. We've been very aggressive in our government in terms of keeping both personal and corporate tax rates low because we feel that spurs investment. We've been very aggressive in promoting a free trade agenda, including the Canada-Europe Trade Agreement, and looking at other potential markets and avenues for trade, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership, etc. We've also asked the very taboo question in government: how can we deliver services more efficiently and more effectively? You all have to do that on a daily basis. We feel we have to do the same as well, but how do we do that and still deliver the services that Canadians provide or rely upon? Which is where I think the nexus is with the topic that you're talking about today. You know, what is government's role in CSR? I think the lead-in question to that is, what is social license to operate? It's a word we all use, it's on all of our tongues today, it's in all of your panels. And as a legislator, that's something that I've struggled with, because as a regulator, I think that Canadians look at the government as they want us to be credible regulators. They want to know that, yes, there is an economic impact to the development of our natural resources. There is a great benefit to Canadians across the country, but there's an opportunity cost, because one of the values that we hold dear as Canadians is protecting our natural heritage. So they want to know that the government, A, understands that economic growth perspective, but also is committed to ensuring that our environment is healthy and sustainable, that the people that are affected by growth in communities are acknowledged and active participants in these decisions, and that folks that are working in the industry also have safe and healthy lives as they participate in these economic growth activities. So how do we do that? So regulation, that's always what comes to mind. And regulation can either be a carrot or a stick. I think that when you look at regulation in terms of it being an economic determinant to growth, we have to be very careful in terms of Canada's competitivity. There's a lot of discussion in other markets around the world about the level of regulation, the unpredictability of it, and certainly when we're looking at major capital programs investment in major capital projects such as those in the natural resource sector, making sure that we have predictable, stable, and transparent regulatory process that shows the Canadian public that we're committed to safety is that balance. So when we look at that in the context of corporate social responsibility of debate to late, this is things like our government's commitment to reducing greenhouse gases through a sector-by-sector regulatory approach, working with each sector to make sure that the desired outcome will be achieved without having negative economic impact. In reviewing major capital projects from an environmental perspective, can we drive to a decision in a timely way that respects stakeholder views, but still assures business of a decision within a set parameters and that are transparent, as well as within a certain period of time? And we feel that we've been doing that through our responsible resource development regulatory process, but we know that it's an ongoing dialogue because of the attention to this issue that we see around the world and here at home. I also think that we cannot lose the conversation of innovation when we talk about government's role in CSR. My background is in intellectual property management. I come out of academic tech transfer as well as looking at venture capital analysis. And what I think is an untold story about Western Canada in specific is the secondary industries that have arisen out of the extractive industries that are here in terms of clean technology, in terms of innovative public policy, in terms of processes, workplace safety, all of these sorts of things that make our industry more competitive, but also more sustainable. So how do we as a government incent innovation? And that's something that we are absolutely seized with, not only because it creates products and processes that grow our economy, because it solves problems. If companies and our government aren't innovative, both from a widget development perspective and a policy development perspective, I'm not sure we can be successful in the long term. And that's why in the budget that we just announced this week, Economic Action Plan 2014, we committed to balancing the books, which we're on track to do. We feel that that is very important, keeping taxes low, but also investing significantly in the innovative process in Canada. One of the things I was very proud of was that we committed to $1.5 billion of new funding for Canada's universities in terms of research excellence, but also a wide variety of programs that help translate that research to market. We're great at research in this country, but how do we translate those outcomes into the marketplace, into a functional perspective, and how do we incent you as industry to do more things like COSIA? COSIA is a great example of what industry can do when I think, working in the context of a positive regulatory framework as well as a government that is committed to innovation. So I think what I'll leave you with is this. This is a discussion that is not static. It's not something that we can just take a snapshot in time and say we've checked the boxes. We always have to be looking at how industry and our economic growth impacts the communities that we're working in, how it impacts the workforce of this country, and how it impacts government policy. So an ongoing dialogue is something that we are more than committed to. Many of you are aware of the fact that we have changed our regulatory process in recent years. I think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that as major projects go through this process, we need to be asking, are they checking the boxes in terms of Canadians' expectations for safety? Is our regulatory regime around safety, once the build-out of projects have occurred, is that adequate? Is it meeting target needs? And then, most importantly, communicating the success that we have as a nation in this regard. You know, this is not a doom and gloom file for us. When we look at corporate social responsibility in Canada, we are world leaders. We should be proud of what we're doing here, and we should be telling the story because it is a competitive advantage for us. We're a good place to do business financially, but we're also a good place to do business in terms of social responsibility. You know, social license to operate. Oftentimes I think of that as what our job is. It's regulating, it's issuing the permit, it's talking about land use planning, all of these sorts of things that are a piece of paper. But social acceptability is a different standard, and I think we've got a lot to be proud of in Canada. So we also look to you as partners in government. Corporate social responsibility should be partnership in terms of communicating success. And I think that that's something that has come a long way even in the last 2 years, and that we remain more than committed to at the federal government level. With regard to my portfolio, Western economic diversification, I am very, as a minister, keenly interested in seeing how the Western Canadian economy can benefit from innovative processes and technologies that are driven by a desire to achieve better corporate social responsibility. We've done a lot of work within my department to refocus our programs and service delivery models to achieve this goal. And I'm just so proud of what our economy has achieved in this regard in recent years. So I guess today what I'd leave you with is this. This should be as much about a celebration as it is about forward thinking on how to solve problems. We do have a good track record. Where there are opportunities to affect change and improve, we should talk about the how, as Gore talked about earlier. What are the best ways to achieve the overcoming those problems in an economically responsible way? But we see it as a partnership with you. So congratulations on meeting today. We hope that this is an ongoing dialogue. As a federal government, we're here to listen. We're here to look at our policy instruments and our funding programs in terms of how we incent this behavior. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Rempel. The Scots have a proverb, at least my grandfather claimed it was a Scottish proverb, about I cried because I had no shoes, and then I saw the man with no feet. And I know a lot of the discussion we've had this morning is about how we need to improve our CSR practices, but Michelle made a very, very important point, and I think a number of our speakers have already, and I'm sure it's a theme that will continue through the day. I had the opportunity earlier this year to work with the Alberta government in Poland and the Ukraine, speaking about Alberta's unconventional resource sector and how things get done. Huge amount of interest from the state apparatuses in both Poland and the Ukraine about our CSR practices. They know we're very competent in the reservoir. They know we can use microseismic technology to guide and tell us about where the fractures are and how the hydrocarbons are escaping. But what really fascinated them was how far we have gone down the CSR road, because they see that as a critical part within the European Union context, especially for Poland, which is a member, to unleashing some of the value in their own hydrocarbon reserves. So just as we prepare for our next speaker, I want to reflect about our sponsors. And typically there's a point in all programs and conferences like this when the sponsor's great and they do all these sorts of things. This is a bit of a different game, because none of our sponsors ever said, what can you do for us? It was all about us saying, we can do these things for you. But they stepped up to the plate. So the Tervitas of the world, one of our gold sponsors, no question, this is the right thing to do. It's a CSR investment. Suncor, you heard from Gord a few moments ago, stepped up to the plate. No questions asked about how big our logo is going to be or how many people can we be. They made the investment. And so too it is with our platinum sponsor, Statoil. And I remember with my colleague from the federal government, Corinne Graziano, who I referenced early this morning, and we met with the Statoil team, and Olja, and Allison, and Mike, and Stoli Tungevisk, who is the president of Statoil, came into the room, and we sat, and the ethos around doing the right thing was palpable in the room. Palpable in the room. And that characterized the ethos of all of our sponsors in this, and a big thanks to them all for making this day possible. So, with no further ado, I'd like to invite Ann Downey, who I've shared the podium with at other events. Ann Downey is the VP of Operations for Statoil, and she's here to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Bill. When we look back on past generations of individuals with the foresight and fortitude to make a difference and truly shape social change, the list is short, but as diverse as the issues it covers. Today, we face many of the same issues as our parents and grandparents, and some new ones as well. Global energy supply and how we develop this supply is an ongoing and hot topic of conversation across the globe, something I don't need to tell this group. To develop these resources in a way that will leave a positive legacy requires collaboration with industry, governments, nonprofits, and community, a collaborative effort founded in shared value. The central premise behind creating shared value is that the competitiveness of a company and the health of the communities are mutually dependent, and at Statoil, we share that way of thinking. Shared value is a principle that aligns with our approach to sustainable development. This principle acknowledges that since companies and society are a part of the same big picture, business competitiveness can be enhanced through improved social performance. Through our core activities, we aim to provide benefits to our host communities and build trustful relationships. This is reflected in our corporate social responsibility policy. We strive to create shared value by making decisions based on how they impact our interests and the interests of the society around us. We strive to ensure transparency, promote anti-corruption, respect human rights and labor standards, and contribute to local content in our operations. Shared value is an emerging corporate social responsibility trend that aligns with our approach to sustainable development. This principle acknowledges that since companies and society are part of the same big picture, business competitiveness can be enhanced through improved social performance. Simply put, by investing in the economic and social well-being of the communities, we will all benefit. We all share commitment to a different way of thinking and to the concepts and principles underlying shared value. By sharing opinions and resources, and through partnerships, the extractive industry will continue to demonstrate leadership and commitment to sustainable development and shared value creation. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce a man who has put a lot of thought into the concept of shared value and who will share some fascinating insights with us. Michael E. Porter is the Bishop William Lawrence University Professor at Harvard Business School. He is a leading authority on company strategy, the competitiveness of nations and regions, and strategic approaches to societal problems. Professor Porter's work is widely recognized in governments, corporations, nonprofits, and academic circles across the globe. Professor Porter's core field is competition and company strategy. He is generally recognized as the father of the modern strategy field, and his ideas are taught in virtually every business school in the world. Professor Porter's work has also redefined thinking about competitiveness, economic development, economically distressed urban communities, environmental policy, and the role of corporations in society. Professor Porter serves as an advisor to business, government, and the social sector. He has served as strategy advisor to numerous leading U.S. and international corporations. He serves on 3 public boards of directors and has led national economic strategy programs in numerous countries. Professor Porter has founded 3 major nonprofit organizations: the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City in 1994, which addresses economic development in distressed urban communities; the Center for Effective Philanthropy, which creates rigorous tools for measuring foundation effectiveness; and FSG, a leading nonprofit strategy firm serving NGOs, corporations, and foundations in the area of creating social value. Professor Porter received a BSE with high honors in aerospace and mechanical engineering from Princeton University. He received an MBA with high distinction from the Harvard Business School, where he was a George F. Baker Scholar, and a PhD in business economics from Harvard University. He is the recipient of 21 honorary doctorates and several national honors. He received the first ever Lifetime Achievement Award from the United States Department of Commerce in 2008 for his contribution to economic development. A very impressive resume. And I don't think I covered half of the accomplishments of our keynote speaker. So without further ado, please welcome Professor Michael Porter.
Well, thank you so much. That was a bit embarrassing. And it makes me feel old. Too many, I remember all those things. Well, I am truly honored and privileged to be here today, to be part of this incredible meeting. I'm stunned, frankly, at how many of you are here and who is here. And I'm heartened and excited about the kind of philosophy and the choice and the theme of this session. And I'm here today to try to contribute to the dialogue, here in Canada and here in Alberta about these issues of how business and society relate to each other. But I'm also here to talk about some work that we have been doing for about the last year with FSG, the nonprofit social impact consulting firm that was just introduced to you, about the impact of the extractive sector on communities and how we could rethink the relationship. When we use the word extractive, we're talking about both oil and gas, energy, as well as mining. And as we'll see later, these fields share very many similarities in terms of the complexity and the nature of their interaction with the communities and societies in which they operate. What I'd like to do today is share with you some of the emerging learning from that work, and invite your comments, invite your questions, and invite your participation in this work. We are here, I think we're at a moment when, as the minister just said, we're in a time of kind of transition in a very positive way in the business community, in thinking about how we relate to society and what our role really is. But I think there's an opportunity now to take this whole question to an entirely new level. The level we call creating shared value. And I'd like to spend a little bit of today's session talking about that idea, how it builds on what's come before, how it's different, and how to think about it in this extractive sector and in the energy and oil and gas sector that's has so much weight in this community. So let's begin. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the extractive sector, the nature of that sector, because in a sense it represents a stress test for this whole question of how a business relates to society. I think the first thing we need to all accept and understand is that the extractive sector, including oil and gas, is huge. It accounts for, our best estimate is about 5% of all of global GDP. Huge companies with enormous resources, a lot of employment, and unique in that many of the operations in this industry are located in remote and often poor and often developing regions and countries. And the economic impact of this field, these sectors, is gigantic in terms of its impact on economic prosperity and on the potential for economic development in the places in which it operates. Even in an advanced economy like Alberta, this sector is a big deal. Its weight is huge, and this is typical around the world. Now, what are some of the common characteristics of the extractive sector that create such a stress test for the relationship between business and the surrounding society? Well, many of these characteristics, I think, are obvious to all of us. The reserves are often in very remote areas, often in areas with massive social needs. You know, even here in Alberta, there's a lot of societal needs affected by this sector, or touched or influenced by this sector. Environmental needs, indigenous community needs, health needs, infrastructure needs, economic development needs, all kinds of needs are profoundly affected by this sector. This sector is one where the capital that it brings to regions is truly epic. It dwarfs everything else. And that creates opportunities if that is used in a good way, but also tremendous tensions and challenges if it isn't. And of course, as we'll see later, we see those tensions and challenges all around the world. This sector has a very long time horizon. Typical project in this field is 50, 60, 70 years. You're going to be around for a long time. This is not something where you're in and out. And often beyond the end of the project even, they're ongoing. There's a long tail of requirements, remediation rules, and realities that have to be addressed that stretch the time horizon even longer. There are multiple issues and points of contention and contact with local communities in this field. You all know these very, very well. This is true in virtually every mining operation I've ever seen all around the world. Unique to this industry, the sheer level and stakes and emotion of these relationships. Often a lot of legal and regulatory requirements that you are all familiar with. The reason that we at FSG have decided to really undertake this work on the role of business in society in the extractive sector is because it's really a unique, it's almost stress test of the whole idea of how businesses and societies interact. It's a very rich area for understanding not only what could be done better in this sector, but also in business as a whole, because the challenges here are truly great. Now, all of you in this sector have noticed these issues. You've noticed that there's a lot of challenges and a lot of points of contact with the local communities, both at the official government level and at the community level. All of you have been doing a lot. Virtually every company in this field has a systematic, energetic program for thinking about its impact on the community. That goes under various names. You have community relations activities that are substantial. You have government relations activities that are substantial. There's a lot of effort. There's a lot going on. As the minister just said, I think in some level we've made progress. The dialogue has changed. The discussion has changed. And progress is being made. But if we're very brutally honest about it, if we look at this globally, things are not working as well as we hoped they would, and as well as we expect they would. Here is a field that, from a global point of view, is encountering today, still today, massive strife between the community and between the business. Massive tension and massive disruption on truly an immense scale. These are just a few of dozens, hundreds of examples from every part of the world about the tensions and disconnects and strife and conflict between the business and the community. Despite the fact that we're doing a lot, despite the fact that we're spending a lot of money, we've started documenting the budgets that go into the community government relations account. And they're big. You know, some big companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year at this. But yet, there's no evidence that the disruption and the risk is actually declining. In fact, we don't have proof of this, but if anything, the sense is the opposite. That is that this is getting worse in a way. There's more incidents. Those incidents are more expensive and more costly. So I think we have, if we're being realistic and if we're being honest, we have to ask ourselves, you know, are we approaching this issue the right way? And I would say this, same question applies to all business activity related to the community, related to social and societal issues. I think we're at a time when that question really needs to be re-examined across the board. Because if you look at all the surveys, the trust and the legitimacy of business is actually declining. Business as an institution has lost standing over the last 10 or 20 or 25 years. Despite the fact that we all have CSR programs, we're all trying. The question is, are we thinking about this the right way? Are we pursuing this area in the right way? And we think that there's an opportunity to take our thinking at least another big step forward. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. And that feeling has been reinforced and amplified by this work that we've been doing now for the last year in the extractive sector. We've been around the world, we've talked to many of the players, we have much more work to be done, but I think we're seeing a new opportunity and we're seeing some evidence that that new opportunity really works. So let's talk about that. How have we been approaching this issue so far? Well, it's quite interesting that in this field we have a name for the problem, and that is non-technical risk. And when I first saw that phrase, you know, when we first started this work, I said, what's that? Well, and that's all the stuff that goes wrong, basically, in the community. And the cost of this non-technical risk, if it happens, if the risk actually turns into a problem, the cost is huge in many cases. And that cost takes many, many forms. typically, we've seen around the world, the response to this non-technical risk is, how can we minimize this non-technical risk through addressing sort of the visible manifestations of the points of tension? Politics, the discomfort and demand of local constituencies and stakeholders and local influencers, dealing with the often unrealistic expectation that the community has for what we should do and what our role should be in business, kind of addressing those folks that are opposing our operations, and trying to understand why they're opposing them and doing something about that. Trying to manage the image and the media coverage of our sector, so that the image we have is not reinforcing the problem and feeding the problem, but actually hopefully moving in the opposite direction. We have a long history in this field of putting a substantial amount of effort and activity into all of those areas. Now, how have we done that? Well, if we look more generally at business, and we've thought about how businesses approach societal or social issues or social concerns, there's been really two major tools employed. Kind of the original approach, going back 25 or 30 years when this issue kind of became salient in the minds of many companies, was the notion of corporate philanthropy. Basically, we give money. We allow and encourage our employees to volunteer to, worthy social causes. Philanthropy is good. We in business need to learn to give back, just like all citizens should be giving back in whatever ways they can to make the society better. Philanthropy is a major part of what we see around the world in the extractive sector in terms of what approach is taken. Efforts to encourage our employees to volunteer, funding of local NGOs and nonprofits and worthy causes. There are myriad of societal problems that every region in which we operate has. We try to kind of be good citizens in kind of doling out resources to try to help organizations deal with those problems. That is one of the key parts of every company's agenda today, and that's good. We need to invest, in being generous and being philanthropic and making investments, in our communities in order to make things better. That's good. The problem is that if what we're doing is only philanthropy, making donations to worthy social causes, the evidence is pretty clear that although it's good and we're making things better, we're really not solving problems. No company, even an oil company, has the resources to, by itself, solve many of the societal problems we have, the environmental problems, health problems, poverty problems, education problems, disability problems. There's so many challenges in the communities in which we operate. And yes, we should be giving money and being generous, but our resources, particularly because we have to divvy them up among multiple, causes and organizations, don't usually solve the problem. They may help, but they're not a solution. That's part of being a good member of the community, but it's not ultimately a path to success, to ultimate success. It's a step, but ultimately the end point is uncertain. Recognizing this, many companies have moved well beyond philanthropy. Not just making lots of little donations, but towards this broader concept called corporate social responsibility that we've heard a lot about today. Ironically, when I was walking down the hall here, there was another major energy company having a CSR meeting. And a lot of you, all of you, I would suspect, have a CSR effort. What is corporate social responsibility and how is it different from philanthropy? Well, it's much broader. It involves committing resources and committing time, but on a broader set of things than just making charitable donations. Compliance, making sure that we're complying with the letter and the spirit of the expectations of the community. There's a whole lot of metrics now that companies are expected to meet in terms of to demonstrate their compliance, that they're meeting ethical standards and pursuing sound business practices. Good corporate citizenship, being present in the community, engaged, communicating, talking, understanding, being helpful in the community. That's part of CSR. All of you are doing this at one level or another. Critical mitigating harms, mitigating impacts is part of CSR. Impacts on the environment, impacts on diversity, impacts on all the many societal issues and challenges that have surfaced. You know, one of the things about this moment in history that really strikes me is the degree to which we are so aware of all these societal issues and challenges and impacts in a way that we just weren't, 20 years ago. The degree to which young people today are really deeply focused on these issues in the world that we're facing, even in advanced economies like Canada and the U.S. And I think there's an effort to ensure now, through a variety of mechanisms, that companies are doing everything they can to minimize any negative impacts they have. And in the course of all of this activity, one of the central ideas in corporate social responsibility is really to build trust and the company's reputation in the community. Now, some people then go and say, well, that gives us a social license to operate. We heard that phrase earlier from the minister. And that is often part of the package of thinking that suggests that is related to corporate social responsibility. Is this good? Yes. Is this a step forward? Yes. Can we do it even better? Probably. Can we be more effective in this set of activities called CSR? For sure. It's part of what I think the minister, or maybe Ann said a minute ago, it's about doing the right thing. And that has been really one of the animating ideas in corporations for thinking about their role and their responsibilities and their obligations in society. And we've moved a good way down this road. And I think because of the circumstances I described earlier, the extractive sector has probably moved a little bit farther than most fields. Because you're just under the microscope, in the spotlight, whatever metaphor we want to use, compared to many other industries. But the question is, is this enough? Is this going to lead to a solution to the strife, to the tension, to the disconnects? Well, there I think we have, a real question. As we've gone around the world, we've come to see that the corporate social responsibility mindset, doing the right thing, being a good citizen, minimizing harm, is kind of necessary, but may not ultimately be a solution to these issues. If you just look at these quotes, you start to see the underlying concern and discomfort, actually, among leading thinkers in the sector about this whole effort. It's about bragging rights. There's no correlation between the amount of money we're spending and really the results we're getting, and whether we have strife or problems or not, and so on. If we step back and say, well, why is this? Why is this? We start to see that kind of the existing approach that many companies are using, and I'm not saying all, and I'm not saying you, but what we find as we talk to like hundreds of organizations is this approach puts us in a place where ultimately I think we don't want to go. You know, if we're responding to the wish list that we hear from the community, if we're trying to address the loudest voices that are complaining the most, if we're acutely concerned about our near-term reputation, if we're focused on hitting our targets so we can say we're spending a lot, if we're trying to get credit and PR for what we're doing, we're on a slippery slope. And too many CSR efforts really feel this way. It's not that the people that are involved are bad. It's not that the things we're doing are necessarily the wrong things, but the philosophy, the thinking is putting us on a path that actually leads to non-success. Moving targets. We do this, there's another request. Making these unilateral investments in what some people today in our other meetings have called white elephants, you know? There's a lot of white elephants we've built with these efforts that actually haven't produced any significant impact on the community. Prioritizing image over outcomes, what we're actually achieving in the community, how the community is getting better in areas where the community has deficits or weaknesses, or we're having an influence in that community or that area that actually is not what we'd like it to be. You know, teaching the outside world to look at us in terms of dollars, how much we spend, and making that the metric of whether we're doing the right thing or not, whether we're good or not, whether we're worthy or not. And the most important problem with this traditional mindset that we see so often is that it actually overlooks and doesn't fundamentally address the most fundamental community needs and opportunities for our businesses to actually drive economic development in our regions. I think what's happened is kind of unwittingly, for a variety of organizational and other reasons, I think the CSR path is good as a part of an overall strategy for how the company is going to relate to its communities. But it's not the path. And it's very risky for us to get down that path with the wrong philosophy like the ones illustrated on this slide. These approaches just don't work. They may mitigate political risks in the short run. They may placate critics. They may calm things down a little bit. But ultimately, unless we're actually addressing the real substantive problems of the communities in which we're operating, we're not going to solve this issue. So how do we make the next step? Well, what we would say is if you have technical risk, where does it come from? Now we might say it's the media, it's NGOs, it's political activists, but where does it really come from? It really comes from things like lack of economic opportunity, in the areas surrounding our operations, in poor health outcomes, and in civil strife and lack of security in the community, and political instability in the community, and environmental issues in the community, and gender issues. And it comes from a whole host of underlying causes. And the only way that non-technical risk is ever going to get better in a fundamental sense is if we deal with these. That's our only hope. And they're hard. They're really hard. It's really easy to give money to an NGO. That may be a great thing to do, by the way. I'm very pro-NGO, as you'll see. It's pretty easy to have a big government relations operation and show up at every meeting that ever happens in the region. It's a good thing to do. It's pretty easy. It's hard to figure out in whatever community you're operating in, and Canadian mining companies, I was at a meeting a few minutes ago, and we went around the room, and Canadian mining companies and people in this room operate all over the world. In Angola, and Zambia, and Peru, and Colombia, and Bolivia. And so it's not just this community, but it's also all the communities in which all of you are playing. We've got to figure out what these underlying issues are and ultimately move the ball forward on those issues. And that's not how much money we invest, and that's not, what our reputation score is. That's the reality of what's happening on the ground. And what we find is most of you, I hesitate to say you, most of you don't measure this. We can't, if we ask you, you can't tell us, well, what are the 5 or 6 fundamental deficits of the region in which you're operating and the things that really are the underlying problems, and then how's your outcomes? And that's because that's not what CSR was designed to do. It's disconnected from the business. It's become kind of a world of its own. Now, a funny thing, though, happens when you start thinking this way. When you start thinking about underlying causes, when you start thinking about the root problems in the community, and all of you could make this list in your community, I'm sure. When you start thinking this way, you start to get the glimmer of something really, really, really interesting. And that is that if you're dealing with the underlying causes, you start to see opportunities actually to impact your business, the real business of extracting oil and gas or mining a particular metal. You start to get at things like how much you're spending on the fly-in, fly-out workforce, which is huge and a real cost. You start getting at things like how much money you're having to spend on getting suppliers, flying in at egregious cost to meet your basic contracting and other needs. You start to get at the enormous cost of not having an available local workforce and having to go through gyrations and enormous costs to kind of assemble a workforce and get people to temporarily live near your operations that have the skills that you need. And you start to realize that a community where there's poor health and civil strife and political instability is a very expensive community to do business in many, many ways. So all of a sudden, when we start thinking about these underlying societal problems and needs in the communities in which we operate, and what if we could address those, we start to see a business model. A business model. Not a philanthropic model, not a doing the right thing model, a business model. And that truly is magic. Because if we can start seeing the right approach to dealing with these societal problems and needs through the lens of shared value, where addressing a societal challenge or need or deficit or weakness actually enhances the underlying fundamental performance of the business, where we can see issues that way, we unlock a tremendous power. Because if we can see things that way, it's scalable. It doesn't require endless donations. It pays for itself. It harnesses the very best of us, of our organizations as businesses, which is what we are. We're not community relations experts. We're businesses. This is the promise. This is the opportunity of shared value. Now, again, let's be really clear about the difference between CSR and shared value. And by the way, let me say before anybody even thinks it, we got to keep doing CSR. I'm not saying replace CSR. I'm saying let's add a new dimension that I predict will be more like a solution. What's the difference? Here's a great example of the difference. The whole concept of fair trade. Everybody know what that is? So fair trade says the fundamental problem that fair trade is about is really inadequate incomes of usually small-scale producers of goods and services, cocoa bean farmers or coffee farmers or little farmers in Africa that are cultivating a crop. And the whole notion of fair trade is those people are poor. They're producing a very valuable commodity. That commodity is producing enormous economic returns, but they're not sharing very much in those economic returns because they're small and poor and disadvantaged and not, able to cope with the powerful multinationals and the supply chains that get their product to market. So now, is that a real problem? Yes. Are there a lot of poor farmers in this world? Yes. Do they have inadequate incomes? Yes. Do those inadequate incomes lead to all kinds of environmental damage that happens in regions where we have this problem? Yes. Does that environmental damage really lead to disruptions in the supply chain and lots of issues that actually come back to haunt the businesses involved? Yes. All those things are true. The fair trade solution, though, says, okay, our solution is we're going to take money from the downstream and we're going to give more of that to the farmer. We're going to pay a fair trade price. Typically that price is 20 or 30% higher than the market. Not always, but roughly in that range. And that's going to get more income to that small farmer and his or her family, and that's going to help. It's going to make things better. Is that true? Yep, probably true. Also feels good, feels fair. That word fair feels good. Our consumers like to buy fair trade products, and they'll pay a little extra for them. And that's become kind of table stakes in many consumer categories. So it feels fair. It works in the sense that, yes, we get some more income to the farmer, but the question I ask is the question we always have to ask, is this a solution? And there I'd have to say no, it's not a solution. This is a Band-Aid. This is a little redistribution of income. But if you're paying somebody more for the same thing they did before, you're not on the path of a solution. So what's happened over the last 5 years or so is a variety of sophisticated companies that depend on small farmers for their raw materials have said, you know, let's think about this differently. And you see on the slide what they did. They said, okay, instead of paying more for the same thing, let's actually mount a different procurement process. Let's create field forces that provide technical assistance. Let's provide little, kind of receivable financing so that people can acquire whatever equipment or fertilizer they need. Let's put our quality inspection people out in the field so that the farmer can kind of assess the quality of their coffee beans or the quality of their cocoa beans or the quality of their produce, because that's going to have a big impact on the price and on the spoilage rates and the yield. And in the process, let's boost the yield per hectare of whatever crop it is. Let's work with the farmer to do that and hopefully get the quality up. And so if we get the quality up, what happens? The price goes up. And of course, when you have higher quantity and a higher price and you multiply those things out, what do you end up with? A lot more income. Fair trade is a CSR solution, doing the right thing. It's laudable, it feels right, it's not a solution. Creating shared value is a capitalist solution. I hesitate to use that word. Occasionally today, when I use the word capitalist, I get booed. It's a capitalist solution. It's about raising the fundamental value being created, and then that value can be divided in a way that's really very good for the players. And this CSV solution, the shared value solution, often will boost farmer incomes or can boost farmer incomes by 200 or 300%. And puts them on a path to improve their productivity and keep improving their efficiency and maybe buy a little bit more land, and it goes on and on and on and on. See the difference? It's not about whether one or the other is more worthy or better, but it's a question of outcomes and results and impact. The more we as businesses can address societal issues, whether it's the environment or health or our poor farmers or disability or diversity or whatever the issue is, the more we can address those issues with a shared value model, where we think about how to create that value improvement, the more we're going to solve problems, because the more we can scale. If we can do a little program with 100 farmers in one region of Nigeria, we can do that program for millions and millions and millions of farmers all over Africa, because it pays for itself. It doesn't require government funding. It doesn't require higher taxes. It doesn't require more donations. That's the shared value opportunity. And the question is, how can we bring more of that thinking into the extractive sector, which I think historically has been heavily focused on CSR. Again, CSR isn't bad. I don't want to trigger any immune system reaction from any of you here about CSR. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying we can go further. We have a bigger opportunity. An opportunity that's going to be more effective whenever we can do it. We can't deal with everything with shared value. Every problem can't be solved with shared value solutions, but a lot of them can. And the more we can migrate into that column, the better we'll be. What we've learned over the last 20 or 25 years is just how much shared value opportunity there is. In area after area after area, we've learned that things that used to be the right thing to do are actually the productive and profitable thing to do. Like minimizing the use of energy, like minimizing the use of water, like minimizing excessive logistical moving of things around, which is very expensive, not to mention the carbon. Like having a very safe workplace. There was a time when we thought that it was profitable to have accidents in your mine or in your plant. Now we understand that accidents are a sign of poor technology, poor processes, poorly trained people, and they're enormously expensive, not only directly but indirectly. In area after area, we see that the opportunity to integrate the needs of society and the needs of the community with the needs of the business are present. Shared value, we find, can be created at 3 different levels. One with the product itself. This is not so applicable to extractives because your product itself is, in general, a commodity. But in many other industries, if we rethink what our real product is and who we're really selling it to, we can create shared value for society. Serve underserved customers. Produce products that have dramatically better environmental impacts. Level 2 has to do with the value chain, how we operate. And we're seeing all kinds of opportunities to create shared value there in addressing many of society's most important and scarce resources, including people in our workforce, and making the workforce more productive and therefore giving them an opportunity to improve their income. And then third, and this is very important in the extractive sector, it's improving that local business environment, that local community environment and infrastructure around us, which ultimately has a lot to do with our productivity. Having to do with the fly-in, fly-out phenomena, having to do with attracting the right kind of employees, having to do with the logistical cost of moving stuff around in the regions in which we operate. Now, time is short, but this slide tries to kind of, again, illustrate the transformation that we're proposing with this research that's already to some extent underway, but we'd like to encourage its acceleration. We've got to go beyond the stuff that is not shared value. We've got to go beyond the sort of mechanics of government relations and community engagement. Yes, we want government relations and community engagement, but we've got to move towards the activity where we kind of leverage the impact of the business and the ability of addressing these community deficits and root causes on the business. And in the extractive sector, again, we have opportunities in all 3 levels, but the greatest ones are at level 2 and level 3. Again, because our products are mostly commodities, we have less opportunity to use the product itself. In fact, the product itself is controversial. And there's a debate about whether we should be, using that product or not in many cases. But what we find is that we have byproducts of our products. Many of us are generating and utilizing lots of water, generating and utilizing lots of energy. And we can capture the value for the community of the byproducts. And there's some wonderful examples around the world of how people are using their water purification technology to actually create water for the community or for other related industries in their regions, and so on. On the value chain, you see the kind of obvious big opportunities. Workforce, availability and capabilities. Suppliers, availability and capabilities. Health infrastructure, which is so important to retention and absenteeism and the productivity of the workforce. Emergency response, it goes on. And also in the surrounding business environment. We are operating in business environments in many cases that lack a lot of critical infrastructure. That makes us less efficient. We don't have that cluster around us of supporting industries and institutions. We can build those. They will make us more effective. There's just a few examples that time permits me to share with you today, but one of our major focuses in this work is to come up with really the definitive, exhaustive list of all the examples we can find of extractive industry organizations that have actually started moving in this direction. Here's a water reclamation facility in South Africa. Anglo-American has long been unusually focused on this opportunity. And you can see the enormous impact they're having both on the community, but also on their own economics. And of course, they're on the hook for, treating water forever. So organizing and thinking about the solution this way, rather than just we have to put money into a water treatment facility and that's just a CSR investment, look at the power that this particular investment has created. Here's a program in Azerbaijan on local staffing and supplier development. The enormous participation. This is a large-scale effort that has led to hundreds of millions of dollars of money flowing into the local economy that never flowed there before. Reducing procurement cost and complexity, and raising the skill base available in the surrounding region. This is shared value. Here's an example, a related example in supplier development in Chile, BHP Billiton. I've actually personally visited this program and seen it in operation. Again, you see the metrics. Invest 50 million over 4 years, 121 million ROI so far. That's pretty good. It's not charity. It's not doing the right thing. It is, but it's doing the right thing in a very different way, through a shared value mindset. There are fewer examples so far of companies that are able to have that long-term view that allows them to recognize the shared value in more broad-based economic development in the regions in which they operate. But here's just 3 examples that are very promising. Seeding other related industries, partnering with other organizations around community development programs, and so on. Now, what we see on the previous slide is we see the word partnering. What we're learning is that to create shared value, you often benefit substantially from collaborating with other stakeholders. There's a tendency for companies to say, okay, we're the big company, we're the smart company, we know what to do, we're going to come in, this is our program, we're going to manage it. But as we look at the success cases, we see a lot of partnering going on, partnering with NGOs, who often have the expertise, the on-the-ground reputation, the connections with relevant stakeholders that we don't. We see partnering with governments, collaborating with governments, co-investing with governments in infrastructure with shared value solutions. We see partnering among other companies. COSIA is one of the best examples in the world of this. Bravo. This is an extraordinary example of doing something that seems sort of obvious, that if we got a bunch of companies and we're dealing with these very broad and complex problems, on the pre-competitive level that have to do with infrastructure and basic technology, let's collaborate, let's partner, let's share the cost, including with government. But there's a tendency to try to grab the credit and have it be your program and make it be your reputation builder, and it's hard. It's hard for companies to collaborate in this way. So there's some new kind of roles and relationships. Not all NGOs are here yet, playing this way. Not all governments are playing this way yet, but they'll get there because it works. It works. If an NGO really cares about water, for example, it's going to have much more impact if it works with companies that are major water users, that are driving, water utilization, than it is by just agitating and picketing and hoping that somebody puts in some punitive regulation. So the world is changing here. The opportunity is changing. The thinking is changing. NGOs are evolving. Governments are rethinking their role. The way we're going now in the world on most societal problems is just not going to work. We don't have enough resources and charitable donations and taxes to do it the way we've been doing it. We've got to embrace these shared value approaches. And we've got to see that they are ultimately going to get us to potentially a solution. I'm out of time, so let me skip a number of slides and really get right to the end. How do we move ahead here? What should all of you be doing differently based on what I've covered today? Well, first of all, we believe that you, all the businesses in this room, have to actually rethink your purpose. Why do you exist? What is your purpose? And it's very tempting to think of your purpose in terms of maximizing shareholder value. And I can tell you that, that's fine, and we've got to earn a good return. But if you think about your purpose that way, it's going to be a straitjacket that's going to keep you in the psychiatric ward rather than out there doing things. Our purpose in business is to create value for society through meeting important societal needs in ways that reinforce the growth and prosperity of the communities around us. That's our purpose. And when we think of our purpose that way, and if that's what our mission statement says, all of a sudden it opens up all kinds of new thinking about what we might do, not as a charitable donor, but as a business. So it starts with purpose. We've got to understand the root causes of what's really driving the problems in our community from the perspective of the community, not from our perspective. And start thinking about, okay, what can we do about those? What can we learn about how to tackle those? What is already happening in the community that we could maybe reinvest in and scale with the community? We have to measure. We have to start measuring our social impacts and our social outcomes and how we're doing on all these dimensions that we affect or are affected by. We've got to rethink our organizational model for doing this. Traditionally, it's been a separate activity, government relations staff, community relations staff, out of the line. But if we do it that way organizationally, we're going to be drawn almost inexorably to CSR. If we really want to do shared value and we're thinking about suppliers, we need to get the procurement organization involved. If we're really thinking about skills and retention and attracting new kinds of employees, that's got to be an HR agenda. If we're thinking about mine operations and how we can be more effective in energy and water use, that has to do with the core of our engineering and operating units. So we can't partition this issue away from the business, or we will get what we've had in the past. Good stuff, that's important, but not a solution. And finally, we have to learn how to play with others, including other companies. And again, I really want to commend the COSIA effort as really around the world, and we've now been around the world a few times on this issue, one of the very shining examples of what can happen through collaboration among businesses around fundamental root cause issues. So congratulations to you. It can get better. You can move it ahead. You can implement it even better than you are today, but it's a really, really great start. So what I'm saying here, just kind of to summarize, is we have this inevitable challenge in extractives we're always going to have in relating to society because of our unique circumstances. We've got to use all the tools in our arsenal to kind of address those problems, including philanthropy and including kind of CSR initiatives. But those, I think, increasingly are going to be the table stakes. I think the real opportunity we have is to redefine and rethink the focus of our efforts more in terms of creating shared value. connecting with the business, understanding the underlying drivers of business productivity and success, and putting our investments as much as possible in that column. Indeed, what I believe is those extractive companies, those oil and gas companies that are the best at this are going to be the winners for the next 10 or 20 years. The companies that get really good at this are going to be the companies that get the concession in a developing country or even in an advanced economy. I think I feel a sense of opportunity and optimism around all these intractable societal problems that really I've not felt in decades. Because I think we're starting to see the opening up of this opportunity. The reason I'm here today with you in this region on this topic is because I think we're moving here. There's an acceptance and an understanding here of the possibility. There's some good examples. So let's make Alberta the center of the universe in creating shared value in your sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're just going to go into a Q&A for